because I do know that they're covering a lot of material, a lot of images. They have a presentation to take you through. You will be able, if you're a member or a friend of AWAD, you will be able to access the replay of the event as well. So everyone, have a really fabulous conversation. I would encourage you to ask any questions or add comments into the chat room. I will say as well, we would appreciate if you do keep yourself on mute, because they do have a lot of content to cover. And like I said, you can engage in the chat room. So if I haven't missed anything, I don't think Andre, who's here from the London chapter, is the coordinator. I think I will hand straight over to Fitzgerald, curator, who is moderating today's conversation. Have fun.
Hey, Susan, thanks. I'm Preston Fitzgerald. I'll be moderating this call, and today's talk is going to be about craft and materiality. That is the use of materials in each of the 4 artists' practices. So the first 2 artists are from the Rupin Form Gallery, Bridget Harvey and Rachel Cawley. And the next I'm going to introduce the artists from the Cynthia Corbett Gallery, Emily Taylor and Freya Bamble Carter. First, we're going to have a short introduction about the London Craft Week events at both the galleries, Rupin Form and Cynthia Corbett Gallery. So first, we're going to have a short presentation from Aruna Kalantho, and she's going to talk about what she's doing this week for London Craft Week.
Hello, hi there. Am I audible? Thank you, Andrea. Hi, my name is Varuna Kolanetu and I run Rupin Form. We are a gallery that focuses on contemporary design, craft and applied arts, and all our makers are very strongly pushing boundaries, working within these spectrums. For London Craft Week, we have put together the curated exhibition called Disobedient. It is focusing on wearable sculptures. We have 15 artists who are taking part in it. It is about materials. It is about conversations that go through the scope of political and social and personal dialogues. But they all are pieces that you could hang on your wall, or if you choose to, wear them. They're quickly telling you about, we have the LOT collaboration and 3 other members of the 3 who are part of the LOT collaboration here that's showing through, with Eva Fernandez, who's worked with pins and needles, and with Jessica Ju, who's works with silver and gold. On to the next one, I think we'll give this a little slight different view of our, so here we can see Eva Van Kempen, who works with contraceptive pills to create this very conceptual necklaces and crowns. It's a very interesting dialogue around just abortion and contraceptive and human bodies. Next to that, you could see just above it, you can see Lynn Speak's work, who works with found materials. And to the left, you can see Naomi's McIntosh work, who works with laser cut beechwood that I've put together, woven together. And I'm going to let you get on with the next. I think Cynthia would be coming on next. I'm really pleased to be coming here, and especially talking about our 2 wonderful makers, Bridget and Rachel, who have such strong, very, very strong ethos to the way they approach their material and their work. Thank you.
Cynthia, would you go ahead now?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Cynthia Corbett, and I am the founder and director of the Cynthia Corbett Gallery and the Young Masters Art Prize. This is actually our 4th London Craft Week, and we're really delighted to be involved in the new digital hybrid world that we find ourselves in. And we are delighted to be actually we're in 2 hotels for this for this London Craft Week. We have an exhibition on right now called Focus on the Female, which Emily is actually a part of, that's across the street at the Hotel Exhibitionist. And then we've actually launched the opening of this new hotel, Gainsborough Hotel, with the curation that we put together for London Craft Week. And it's just so, we're really so pleased about this, that our artists were able to come together and form a curation that kind of is playing homage to Gainsborough himself, who was quite an exciting contemporary artist in his own day. And we tried to put together a really interesting curation, which encompasses all the different artists that you're seeing on the screen. And obviously, Emily Taylor is here down from Sheffield. We're delighted that she could make the journey. And Emily is going to talk about her practice. And then also Freya, who's there, in her studio. And we will be actually here for the entire month of October. And in residency. So we're going to be doing a number of activities. We're having a preview tonight where we have, we're open all the time. And we have a lot of interesting things on our website. And we're really excited to explore, materiality, but the narrative behind the meaning and narrative behind materiality. That's kind of my thing. Through Young Masters and the group of artists that have come together here. So that's me. And I think at the end, we'll put some links in, won't we, Christina? Because I actually don't know how to do that. So someone else will do that. So enjoy.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. And now we're going to go to the first of our 4 artists we're going to talk about. And the first one will be Bridget Harvey will briefly explain her practice, and then we'll get to some questions after the 4 artists have spoken. Bridget?
Great, thanks, Preston. So hi, everyone. Nice to see you all this afternoon. So my name's Bridget. I'm a maker, and my through my practice, I'm really interested in looking at the concepts and processes of making. So what we make, how we make it, and why that really matters. I work interdisciplinarily. I handwork discarded domestic objects into new suggestive artifacts, and I draw my techniques from different materials and disciplines and conservation methods. I mostly work at the moment with textiles and fired ceramics, but I also use wood, metal, plastics, all sorts. And I run workshops, and I work as a creative consultant, and I teach as well. Next slide, please, Andrea. I studied for my MA at Camberwell College, where I now also teach, and I've worked as a prop maker, an embroiderer, and an independent designer maker for about 10 years or so now. Next slide, please. I'm really interested in domestic objects, the everyday, and how we relate to them, and from that, how they relate us to the wider world and our kind of bigger pictures around us. And I believe that our, as well as kind of skilled and material knowledge, making can show our political intent, and that by acknowledging the complexities of craft and of making across time and class and place and our intentions, we can kind of figure out what making really means for us today. For me, I try and make my work tactile and desirable, but like visual, but also ornamental. And I'm really inspired by patina and narrative, and the materiality of use and disuse of our domestic things. I try and manifest my research around environmentalism and social issues through my practice, and try and find mindful connections through our hands and our processes and our things. Could I have the next slide, please? For the last 8 and a bit years, I've focused on repair, including doing a practice-based PhD on it, looking at the philosophies and the craft of making repairs in our things, and understanding how it exists in our world now. And for me, I see repairing as an attentive act that can occur before or after a break, and which aims to make something work in a way that is needed for us right now. It's part of most making practices, but it's also a craft of its own. Could I have the next slide, please? I spent 9 months at the Victoria and Albert Museum as artist in residence. This was my studio there, looking at repair in relationship to the museum, understanding conservation techniques and translating them into sort of out of the museum repairs. I used my time with the curators and the conservators to learn about the care of objects of cultural significance and trying to apply that in my own work, my own pieces. And could I have the last slide, please? And so now I'm using those techniques and other ones that I find through my research to develop mended and new objects from old materials, and to kind of provoke conversation and make precious things from our discarded materials. And that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. And next we're going to hear from Rachel Coley.
Thanks, Preston. I think and communicate through materials, producing cutlery, jewellery and sculpture, which are explored in experimental dining events, exhibitions, installations and visual art projects. I gained my BA from Loughborough University and went on to study at RCA, achieving my MA in 2010. And I've been teaching jewellery and metalwork in higher education for around 10 years now. And I went part-time about 4 years ago to focus on my health and my creative practice. Next slide, please. Could I have the next slide? Oh, thank you. I create ambiguous eating implements that are designed to challenge our collective connections with food and communicate aspects of my lived experience as a sufferer of the autoimmune disease systemic sclerosis. I often experience difficulties with my eating, but communicating this in a kind of indirect and fun way, I can strike up a conversation about it through my work. Next slide, please. So while some of the forks are challenging to use, some are actually designed to make eating a bit easier, especially with certain kinds of foods or for certain people who might struggle with holding cutlery. Next slide, please. As well as creating ambiguous eating implements, I also aim to elevate food waste as a luxury material through my jewellery, which questions traditional notions of preciousness and value, highlighting broad societal issues surrounding consumption and encouraging reflection on the waste we generate. Next slide, please. Shagreen Jewellery Series presents denatured citrus fruit peel food waste as a material dupe for the traditionally animal-based luxury surface finish shagreen, which is ray or shark skin. The citrus fruit peel is encapsulated in sintered aluminium frames, which support and maintain the forms, which both connect back to the rounder forms of citrus fruits and also faceted forms that pose and transform it. And the jewellery awakens the senses as it's worn by the body. It emits a sort of subtle fruity fragrance. Last slide, please. So thank you so much to Ava and Varuna for selecting me to take part in the exhibition. I'm also exhibiting some works in the Discuss Showcase at Great Northern Contemporary Craft Fair this weekend. And this is sort of a development on from using the jewellery, the food waste in my jewellery, but making it a bit more accessible as a part of Craft Space's We Are Commoners exhibition, exploring craft as a commons. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rachel. And our next speaker to talk about materiality is Emily Taylor.
Hello, I make pots, like big pots like this one here, and I use slip and sgraffito. So I coil pots. I roll out coils and build the pots, and then decorate them with slip. So a tradition that's been with us since people probably discovered clay and dug it up in the ground near their village and didn't have the techniques to glaze, so would use a coloured clay and put that onto the pot and then draw into it. Historically, those pots would have told stories that combined the personal and the political of what was going on at the time. So births, marriages and deaths would have sat alongside what was going on in the church, or what was going on with the royalty. And I'm quite interested in using slip and sgraffito now to make slipware that tells stories that may be hidden or maybe aren't that visible in art galleries and museums. So I think if we have the next slide. So this is a series of pots. This one and the next one are taken from a series of work called Edgelands. And I used the myth of Persephone and Demeter and made a large body of work to commemorate really the women that spoke out in Rotherham about the grooming, the institutionalized grooming that was being uncovered in Rotherham and in Rochdale. I was a drug and alcohol worker for a long time in Sheffield, so those stories were quite familiar, and it was incredible to hear those finally being taken seriously. And I wanted to make some huge vessels that held this in stone. So the 3 vessels were made in this yellow colour, the cornfield, the edgelands of the town and the city, and the young teenage girls based on Persephone who were out playing with their friends before she snatched to the underworld. If we go back to the black pot just before this one, the other 3 pots were in this black clay and told the story of Demeter, who freezes the harvest, freezes the earth, so she goes on a search looking for her daughter who's been taken. And yeah, they were exhibited at Gallery Oldham, and it toured to the Craft Study Centre Farnham and the Potteries in Stoke, and to the Williamson. Then I can go to the next slide. Oh, these are pots from my most recent show in Rugby. So that show was called Mayday, 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 and it opened just after lockdown ended, and the work was made during lockdown. The one on the right is Our Lady of Lockdown, and the one on the left is called Mayday, Mayday. And these were pots made about the idea. Well, still, I've worked for a long time about this idea, a formula created by Harvard economists that predicted, with the disconnect of our relationship to the land and the disparity between different layers of wealth in society, we're sort of going to be our own undoing and have 250 years left. So hence the Mayday, Mayday, Mayday title, The Crisis. Also thinking about Mayday's history in trade unionism and in paganism. And I made 6 pots again. They were this size, they were a bit bigger than this one here. They sat around a maypole in Rugby Gallery. Yeah, and I'm delighted to be showing, and that's the final pot. This one is from a series called Beating the Bounds, that I made after having a child. And they talk about the visibility and the presence of the woman within the city, really. One of those is currently at the Whitworth in an exhibition called Still Parents. Yeah, and I'm delighted to be showing 2 new pots at the show here at the hotel through London Craft Week, continuing some of those themes, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. And our 4th speaker is Freya Bramwell-Carter.
Hello, hi everybody. Thank you for having me. So my practice probably began when I was a child. I have a father who's a sculptor, so I was lucky enough to sort of spend time with him in the studio, helping, doing maintenance work, and I just built a strong connection to my father, and I could watch and learn. Art was the only thing that I was really good at, being severely dyslexic and dyspraxic and kind of struggling with school. So being able to use clay as a sanctuary, it was something that I always turned to for therapy. I did a fine art degree at Chelsea, and I found that even though it was a very conceptual course, I found my calling was in being able to use my hands and just channeling good feelings into what I wanted to make. So my work is mostly doing, it's a lot of experimentation, and I learn I think I learn mostly through making mistakes, to be honest, and being as kind to myself as I can. In fact, if you just stay on this slide for a minute, I might go through some of the recent projects I've done, or some series. The top, the left there, second to the left, I did a collaborative piece with a lady called Palace, who owns an interior design company called Studio Cocalia. And this was our first series that we made during the very first lockdown. And there was a lot of fear and desperation in the air. And I was just, even though I shouldn't have, I did sneak my way into the studio, and I managed to do that, which was a blessing. And we came up with this collection of work, and ever since that, it's really hit off. And there's another set on the bottom right hand side, and we've done a few more, and we're about to do another set, which is really exciting. I wanted to show you, but it's in the kiln, and there's a pot that has just been completed, but it's a bit too hot to show you today. There's also, I've got, at the moment, I think the middle one here, I'd like to talk about the little gold amulets, because the story behind these pieces sort of represent my thirst and the heavy emotions that I had when I was a teenager, and I wanted to express myself in clay. And I was really confused as a kid, so this is what I'm channeling into my work now. And I wanted to know what humanity was doing and what we were running around for, and the purpose, and all these big questions that really kind of baffled me, and they kind of locked me up. So I put these little gold treasures on the pot, and they're little cherubs, and it's all about sort of giving each other our love and sharing affection and embodying something precious that we're all chasing. Some people have no idea what it is, but that is what I've been doing. I've done a big collection for Petersham Nurseries, and it's all centered around that. I've spent the past month producing loads of pieces for that as well. So let's move off this a little bit. This is it's called Rust a Rainbow, and I just as I do this craft more and more, for me it's more about breaking the rules and the boundaries that I put upon myself. So it's really about freedom for myself, because as you're making the work, nobody knows what you're making or how you expect it to turn out and all of that, but there's so much self-pressure that kind of cripples the artist, especially doing this, because there's mistakes happen all the time, or your expectations aren't met all the time, and it really teaches you to persevere and not give up. But what I've found is this is why I've really enjoyed doing this collection for Cynthia Corbett, because I've just allowed myself to sort of open up with these expressions, with all this mark making. I wanted it to be fun and playful, and I wanted to exude some of that energy into the audience and just lighten things up a bit, because we are going through a really tremendously difficult period. The whole world is going through some sort of transition here, and I do like to acknowledge that somehow in my work.
Great. Well, thank you, Freya. That was wonderful. And we've got our 4 speakers in. Now I'm going to go to the first set of questions, which are for Rachel and Bridget. Both of you use and repurpose materials such as food waste and broken pottery. These materials have really no intrinsic value, and jewelry is always thought of as a luxury item made from gold or silver and gemstones. Please discuss these use of materials in your practice.
Go on, Bridget.
Yeah, I was just going to say that for me, I see these things not really as waste or as unprecious, but as a potential to kind of open up the conversations about what is preciousness and to question what we consider to be waste and kind of push our ideas to a more broader, more contemporary place around that. So I think that's really one of the most important things for me. Rachel, what about you?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar in that I would consider that I work in the field of art jewellery or contemporary jewellery, which is known to be challenging the traditional jewellery kind of format of precious stones and precious metals. So again, as you're saying, really challenging that idea of what is precious and what is valuable. And yeah, I'm really interested in using waste because it's so prevalent today that we really need to be assessing and reassessing what we perceive of as waste in our lives and trying to look at it with a new sense of value and then try to repurpose it, maybe bring it back in some way. And I think that for me, and particularly my relationship with food, my interest in food, it's really interesting to have conversations through the making and around that with people by transforming the food waste material and bring it back into a context in which people consider it as a precious and valuable thing, through applying my time and my skills to try and transform it in a way.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. Like with ceramics, you know, people think about when you say I work with ceramics, people think you work with clay, but actually because I'm working at the other end of the spectrum. And again, it's a way of kind of provoking people into sort of seeing and discussing it differently and discussing it with me as well.
Yeah, your work's amazing.
And I think what we can't really see on Zoom that Rachel, your jewelry is scented. Apparently, there's a smell when you wear it, and you can get a citrus scent to it.
Yes, yeah. So yeah, it's there. I use different types of citrus fruit, so I can work on different scales. The pomelo is obviously the largest, and then you've got sort of limes and kumquats are sort of smaller. And it's quite interesting when people interact with it. Some people can really notice the lime scents a lot more than maybe the orange or the grapefruit or something like that. So it's interesting. I love to see people interacting with it and having that sensory experience, especially with the heat from the body. It sort of seems to reawaken that sensory experience of the material.
Yeah, so we really need to have someone come down and see it at Rupert Forum to experience it.
Yes,
okay,
go and have a sniff.
Okay, well, this leads us to our next question for both Rachel and Bridget. It's about art jewelry, and people have a misconception. Is it wearable? Is it not wearable? Talk about touch and interaction with your jewelry. How do you want people to react to your work? Is it wearable? Is it for display? Both of you discuss. Maybe Rachel, you go first this time.
Okay. I would love for people to have more opportunity to try and to wear my work. I think it's difficult, isn't it, sometimes with exhibitions and with requirements such as, you know, insurance and accessibility to the work. There isn't always somebody there to invigilate the space or to allow that level of access that you would like. But I try and do events where people can access these pieces and try them on and wear them and experience them, and that's something I'm really keen to do more of in and alongside meal events with the cutlery pieces as well, and bringing the two things together. But I do think it's something that that art jewelry and contemporary jewelry as a field kind of we could do a lot more, I think, to provide exciting opportunities to test the wearability. And I think there are some really exciting artists out there who are doing great things, like yeah, like for instance Zoe Robertson's Focomania. That was fantastic, where you can go and engage with large scale wearables in a kind of playful way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I mean my work at the moment is wearable, although I have made much larger, more kind of statement pieces in the past. But one of the things I think is quite, for me, is quite interesting when you touch the pieces. They look sharp, but they're not. So they sort of appear unwearable, but actually they are really quite practical. They appear fragile, but they're actually very strong. So they've got a kind of inherent contradiction in their touch, in their wearability, and that's something that's really important to me. Sorry, I just had a visitor. I like that kind of I guess disobedience, actually, if we think about the rep and form. Sure, at the moment, I like that kind of that sort of slight naughtiness of looking one way and behaving another way. And I think that's one of the nice things about handling my work, is you get a sense of that contradiction.
Great.
Yeah.
Bridget, we met last year at Collect, well, it seems like our old life, February
Yeah.
2020. And I saw your jewelry at Rupert Form Santa Collect, and it looked good just as displayed. Now, you use bits of broken ceramics in your work. What's the metal that you use to join it and put it together with?
It depends. So the work on display at the moment is all done with silver, but I also use a lot of brass. I like working with those two materials because they're quite malleable. They work well on a small scale, but they're also, again, they have a sense of kind of preciousness around them, and they complement the ceramic itself. One of the techniques that I use actually is an old technique for fixing ceramic, where you drill pieces, you drill short lengths of rod into the ceramic to hold the broken edges together. And that was traditionally done with brass rods. So that's another reason for using that material to develop the pieces of work. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to move on right now to our other two artists, Emily and Freya. And the question for both of you is, you both come from a fine art background, and then you got into ceramics as sort of what your artistic practice is. Can both of you talk about how this evolved and how you got into clay?
Yeah.
Freya, you go first.
Well, I just carried on. After university, I think I was a little bit disheartened by what I learned about the art industry. That was just my perception at the time. So I spent, it took some time for me to warm up to the art, and this is, using clay was my huge door in, because I just thought to myself, why don't I just do what I really enjoy? So I just started teaching kids, and I found that I really enjoy, the best bit of the practice was actually learning to articulate and share the craft, and the humility, the contact that I could share with another human. For me, it was my practice for maybe the first 2 years, when I was really taking it seriously and learning how to talk and be around people, because I was very shy. I'm a twin, and I was a very shy twin. So I grew a lot, and that was my world. And then my teaching just spiraled out. Just every day I was teaching, and my practice alongside, I was developing it really quickly, because I was lucky enough to have my father lend me resources. And I've just been experimenting. It's like a never-ending train. I've just been able to experiment with all different types of stone in my glazes, textures and metals, and different types of clays, and all the different types of techniques. But fundamentally, I've been doing lots of throwing. Yeah, I think.
Well, that's something you can always start learning, and you can never end the teaching and learning with throwing from the wheel, isn't it?
Yeah, people do like to learn how to throw. It's like one of the first things. It's quite a long haul learning how to do this process, but I think it's worth it in the end.
Exactly. And many people who have a ceramic career also teach to supplement their artistic side, which also helps
Yeah.
you in the long run.
It really does help me in the long run. I mean, I must say it was actually probably my first fascination was teaching how to throw. And I was really into sculpture when I was a kid, but my father encouraged me to learn how to take throwing seriously because people want to learn. But I actually love sculpture, and I liked doing faces, and that's what I spent all my childhood doing. So it's a bit of both. I've really flipped between different techniques, and I appreciate bits of all clay has to offer, really.
Great. Emily, let's talk about your fine art background, because your pots are very painterly. There's always a narrative on your pots. Let's talk about your transition from fine art to ceramics.
Well, I related to a lot of what Freya had said, actually, when Freya introduced herself and talked about Chelsea being a very conceptual course. And I graduated from fine art when it was sort of the YBA era, and it was very conceptual, and craft really wasn't fashionable at all. And it was, I found, and also had a bit of a strong reaction to coming out of college into the art world, and I didn't really feel very comfortable there, and I stopped making completely, and I trained as a drug and alcohol worker and worked with people, homeless people using drugs, and ended up working in rehab eventually for a stint, and then found that I wanted to go back to making. And the thing I'd always loved, so I was at Liverpool, and they did have they still had workshops which were being got rid of in the 90s, but we still had a ceramics workshop and a woodworking workshop. And I'd loved clay. I'd always really loved using clay. So I started to go back to night school and use clay. And similarly to like you said, Fred, just do what I loved, do it without anybody asking me to sort of preempt what the finished piece was going to be first, or write a dialogue about it first. Or a lot of the fine art teaching that I experienced disconnected the theory really from the making. Whereas the symbiosis, when I'm making, that's when I'm thinking, and the actual movement of my hands and immersing myself in a material tells me so much more about what I'm feeling and I'm thinking. And it was sort of a process of getting back into the rhythm of that. And then that led me to joining a woman's studio in Sheffield. I had a day a week there, and that gradually crept up. 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, the job crept down, and I left drugs and alcohol work, but I did train as an art psychotherapist because I really wanted to understand making for human beings, and in a kind of an anthropological way, really. So I still lead residencies where I involve people, often people going through change, because kilns are just such a teacher about change, and clay is such a teacher about change. But they are art projects. I wouldn't call them therapy projects, but it was brilliant doing the art therapy course to just gain a bit more anthropological understanding about our need to make with materials, really.
Great. The next question relates to both of your practices again. You both make pots somewhat, particularly on a large scale, and in Emily's case, you use coil method of building, whereas Freya, you work from the wheel, which is completely different method. So what I'd like to ask you both about ornament and decoration on your pots, the use of, both use stoneware. Let's talk about glaze, slipware, luster, sgraffito. Talk about how you decorate your pots. Maybe Emily, you go first.
So when the pot is still, it's leather hard, so the clay has dried, all my decorating really happens then. So it's using, I make stencils from interior patterns. I use a lot of architectural drawings on the pots, so if you can see. A lot of them are inspired by housing estates that were designed as utopias, council estates often. Some that my family are from, and then that's grown to be others. And then I like to have the pattern kind of draw people into the interiors of people's lives and of their homes, and what's on the inside for us as well. going off on one, but so I use the slip to decorate and splash and slip, use pattern and stencil, and then I draw figures, people that often contemporary figures that are guided. I choose them. I'm guided often by ancient myths or archetypes that have existed across cultures. So currently, the horned god, Cernunnos in Celtic mythology, or Herne, as he's manifested in parts of England, or Persephone and Demeter is something that I concentrate on. So I'll find contemporary women or men that often young people to pose and to draw, and then they'll be worked into the architecture. I go over my sgraffito lines in irons. It's iron oxide, rust basically. And then once they've been fired to stoneware temperature and glazed, I add on a gold luster, a bit of bling. And the idea that the clay of the earth and the iron of the industry and the gold that symbolizes a sort of a transcendence or a kind of making of saints of some people that we see every day, that those three materials sit together is really important to me.
Great. Freya?
Yeah, I can relate to what you last said about using gold, luster, and the feeling of opulence that gives you. I've always been interested in power and sexuality and just the system that we're submerged in. And physically looking at a form of a piece. I mean, mine have kind of gone down the floral feminine route. Maybe that's because I'm the opposite. I've been looking at my masculine father's pots, and maybe I just react and do the opposite of that. I don't know, but I really enjoy the femininity and the fluidity that clay can give you, especially once you've thrown the work on the wheel and the clay is still wet. And I really like to distort and alter the shape. What can I show you here? Actually, I painted some luster on this one last night. I really like how it just gives a little bit of opulence and something precious. These are my little figures, and they're all holding a little gem, and on the other side of a pot, the gem will be received by somebody else with like an empty heart. So then that's my little story. And I use lots of glazes heavily laid on top of each other, lots of red iron at the moment and rutile, both types of iron, and they give a really beautiful like marbly finish. Yeah, that's what I say.
Okay, great.
Do you
Thank
plan
you.
how the glaze is going to be before when you're making the pot, or do you kind of respond to the pot and just glaze it in the moment, if you know what I mean?
Thank you. That's a really good question. I look at the piece and I'll respond to the character. Me and my manager do this funny thing where sometimes we just sit down in the studio sofa and we go around and we just talk about the pots like they're different characters, and we're like, oh, that one's called so and so, and it's its attitude and it's really bossy, and so that's what I do. I kind of look at the piece and it talks to me in that way, and I'll address that by how I paint the glaze. So how you paint your glaze in a very detailed narrative, but I kind of do that with the material. So I'll do it with like, oh, that's a dark bit, that's a light bit. And so as I apply the stone, that my thought is that maybe in an abstract manner, it's telling a story in that way. So it's sort of like color therapy, texture and color therapy, if that makes any sense.
Great. Thank you. Now, this is a question for all four of our artists. We've been talking about materiality. Let's talk about how your practice has evolved over time. There's so much research and experimentation. I mean, the average person doesn't realize how much goes into it. So just talk about, with your practice, about using research and experimentation. Maybe we'll start with Rachel and Bridget first.
Yeah, sure. I've been working within research as part of my job, teaching for quite a few years now, and yeah, it's been really invaluable, the support I've got to try and explore ideas in a creative way, and it's fantastic to have access to the great facilities as well, so that you can kind of explore different breadths and different materials and processes and techniques, because yeah, like Emily was saying, and Freya, I definitely I think through the making process, and without having access to all the materials and things, I don't think I'd be able to make the work. So yeah, having the research as part of my job has been really invaluable. But I think also over the years of doing this, I've sort of, you go in these spirals of working around the same sort of themes and continuously sort of developing and yeah, coming across similar things from perhaps different perspectives, and moving forwards in that way. So it's kind of like a forward spiral as I see it, I think.
Rachel?
Yeah, I think that idea of coming across similar things and looking at them from different perspectives is really true of my work as well. I'm really interested in kind of restoring our like forgotten ways of doing things, and drawing out ideas that we've maybe like left to one side, and that maybe we ignore a little bit, and bringing those to the forefront. So I think, like, you know, research in the sort of formal sense of how I do it is really important, because then most of it is done through my actual making. So I might be looking at made objects or handling objects if I'm allowed to, or looking at kind of technical books and those sorts of things. But then it really comes to life when I actually start making in my studio, and I can actually see how we might have done things and how we might do things now, to, I guess, like reinvigorate our objects and also our thinking about them. So yeah, it's an inherent part of my practice, and I think it's also a part that I really enjoy, is the finding out and the testing out of things. Yeah.
Great. Emily?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I do residencies outside of the studio in different contexts quite often. So I did one between Chatsworth Estate, a ducal seat, the Manor Estate, which was Cavendish land, but is now a council estate in Sheffield, where my family's from. And that residency was happening at the same time as austerity was hitting. So to be outside of the studio at that time, and in those two different settings, I think has that period of a year has definitely informed a lot of my practice beyond that, including the Persephone pots, including the May Day exhibition. And I think often another residency I undertook was at the Rural Life Museum in Glastonbury in a tithe barn, and I think that fed into the May Day exhibition too. And often at the end of a residency, it's so time pressured, and you make a response. But it might be a year on that you actually then make a body of work that you think, wow, actually, without meaning to, that is the end of that residency. So for me, it feels really vital and important to keep getting out there and keep working with different communities and different groups of people. And it's taken a long time, I think, to learn not to sort of give myself a time pressured ending to that, but it's the spiral that you just spoke about, Rachel. And I think as I've got older as a maker, I've learned to have a bit more confidence that things will just pop up again, and that's okay, and themes will keep dipping and emerging, and it all kind of feeds in, and you don't always know when it's going to surface again, but keep ingesting it, really, for want of a better word.
Right. Freya. Oh, Freya, you're muted. There we go.
Sorry. I'm purely experimentation based, and I use my research and experimentation parallel to everything that I learn about the craft and about the dialogue in society. And it's interesting how I connect with it in this way. It's quite hard to articulate, but it's like I talk to my clay, to my stuff in a way that probably just comes through maybe energetically when you look at the work. But really important for me now is continuing teaching people from communities that don't have access to this material. That's my future research is all about just being submerged with people and with the material, and sort of push boundaries in theatre settings with special needs, different to develop different communication styles, and using clay on stage. I'm very interested in that and the dialogue that brings. So these are future things that I'm currently pending through. So that's I'm all about expanding the clay narrative in because I feel like all the art forms meet in the middle, and so that's what I'm kind of going for.
Okay, great, thank you. Artists, you're amazing. We went through some very big questions and you answer a lot. I hope it informed people. If we have questions that have been presented, maybe Andrea could share them now. And if not, maybe the gallerist could have questions for the artist.
There's been no questions. I will answer. There has been one, but it's just about the location of the gallery, so I'll answer that via the chat. I think it's great if the gallerist could ask the artist some questions.
Cynthia, you're never at a loss for words.
Verinda, can I go first, or do you want to go first?
Please, you go first, please.
Okay. Yeah, I think with both Emily and Freya, you know, we're really thrilled to be presenting your work at this critical time. I guess one of the questions for both of you would be, because there's so much meaning and emotion and background and layering in your work. I mean, I think, Emily, a lot of it is from your background, a lot of it from your architectural and, you know, anthropological research. And Freya, with you, it's about you. It seems that the struggles maybe you've had, you know, with your education. How do you feel, both of you, that time of reflection that we all had to go through during those 2 periods of lockdown, how do you feel that that's informed your work and maybe some of the future projects that you'll be working on? Freya, maybe we start with you with that.
Oh, Freya, can you
Yeah,
unmute?
you mute.
Forgive me. I mean, with the pandemic and a lot of buildings that have been closed down, there should be a lot more space to open this practice out, to hold more creative spaces, to put on classes for the community and stuff. This is going to be really important for the future. And I want to extend my practice on stage and really bringing more of the sensorial aspect, more of the process into the art form, and validating it and giving it permission, and allowing learning disabled people that don't really have voice. My assistant is autistic, and my twin sister works with learning disabled people, a theatre company. So we're really interested, in fact our whole family is really interested in giving a voice, helping those voices being heard. And so even though you don't really see this on social media a lot because of all of the protection and stuff, we spend a lot of our time working with these people and communicating in ways that are not done with words.
So interesting, like audience involvement, audience interaction, community interaction.
Yeah.
And obviously your theatrical background has informed the visual element to that. That's really interesting.
Yes, it
Great.
actually has. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Now, a last question from Varuna.
Oh, Emily's going to.
Oh, I apologize. Sorry, we're running. We've
Don't
only got
worry.
like 5 minutes left, or 3. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
I mean, in a way, it was quite overwhelming. So I think a lot of things that we saw manifest for society during lockdown are things that my work's deal is interested in thinking about. Again, going back to that disconnection from the land and that disparity of wealth. And I was very lucky that my studio was kept open and I could get there and I could make the Mayday show was very much in response to that during lockdown. What I'm excited to be doing next is working with another artist, Christopher Jarrett, and together we sometimes come together in our socially engaged practice because we have a very similar philosophy about socially engaged practice and should be. And we're working with Recovery, who are hopefully going to use clay textiles and our city understand recovery from their perspective because they've got lived experience of recovery, and we are a city recovering from a pandemic, and make some huge banners and some big pots that will give messages of recovery or what they feel they've learned through recovery. That's a project I'm quite excited to begin.
Okay, thank you. And Varuna?
I have a quick question for all 4 of you here. If there's one word in which you could explain what materiality means to you, what would it be?
Love. What was mine on? No, it's off mute. For me, it's all about love. Sort of what you're, what we're paying attention to. The attention is free, but when we give our attention to something, and we're pouring our energy and our life force into the material, and the clay is capturing that, it's holding on to that, and that, for me, that's such a magical even concept to think of, and it's frozen in time in the work, and that's the favorite thing about this. That's everything for me.
It's beautiful.
There's a lovely podcast about how if you drink every morning from a cup that a maker has made, then you're sort of starting your day with something that's been made with the consideration of your lips and your hands and your touch, and that really relates to what you just said for me, and that objects hold on to love and care. I think for me it would be body, yeah, the relationship to the body, being present in your body, living in your body and using your body, that interaction.
I think for me, sort of continuing from that, it's about interconnectivity and how materiality links us to other people, whether that's people we know, we've bought a cup from a maker that we know and we like their work, or the anonymity of a cup from IKEA. It still connects us to someone, well, actually many people along the line as well. So that kind of interconnectedness.
Yeah, I would say the same. I think, you've all said amazing things and I agree with everything. So I would say connection. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thanks. I don't know if we have much more time left, but I want to thank the galleries for bringing their artists in, and I encourage everyone to visit the galleries for London Craft Week. Varuna's Rupin Forum exhibition is in Marylebone, and Cynthia Corbett's gallery is in the heart of South Kensington. So you've got the rest of the week to see their shows. Any follow-up for the gallerist?
No, thank you. Thank you, Preston, for bringing us together and spending time with all these makers and just getting to know them and these really clever questions. I got to know much more about them, even though I know them really well, at least the ones, my makers, but this was really interesting. So thank you for coming on board and bringing us all together. Avoted Preston.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you all so much. And thank you to, as always, the very brilliant Andrea behind the scenes there. And of course, Susan and lovely Preston. Your questions were amazing. And I really, I share with Varuna, really got to know in more depth the artist practice. And that was great. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for
Thank you.
joining. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care.